Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Mesechet Kilayim. We're up to Perik Gimel Mishnah Bet. Yesterday's Mishnah taught us that you are allowed to plant 5 different species of vegetables in a 6x6 tefach patch and 13 or 18 different species in a patch that's surrounded by a raised border. Our Mishnah today is going to qualify that rule. Kol min zira'im en zo'im ba'aruga. Any kind of plant that is classified as zira'im cannot be planted among these 5 species that is permitted in the 6x6 garden patch. V'chol min yirakot zo'im ba'aruga. But any kind of plant classified as yirakot is allowed to be planted amongst the 5 species that is permitted in the garden patch. And basically the Mefarshim point out, based off this Mishnah, that halakha we learned yesterday, that you can plant many different species in a 6x6 patch. It only applies to the class of vegetables called yirakot, not to the class known as zra'im. Yirakot are the species of vegetables that are generally grown in small amounts in garden patches. Zira'im are those vegetables and plants that are generally grown in large amounts in fields. Now, when these are planted in small amounts together and other species in a garden patch, they look like kilayim with them, since they're not usually grown in small patches. That's why zira'im are no good and yirakot are allowed. Chardal ba'afunim ashufin, mustard and smooth beans. Now the Rab explains that these beans look like they have been smoothed with the wood plane, which is called shufina. Now mustard and smooth beans, we're going to read the brackets, not the parentheses, min zira'im. They're classified as a type of zira'im, and therefore they cannot be planted as one of the 5 species in the 6x6 patch. Afunim gamlanim. However, large beans, and the Mefarshim explain that the Aramaic word gamla'a, camel-like, is used to describe something unusually large. So this large bean, min yarak, it's classified as a type of yerek, and it can be planted as one of the 5 species in the patch. Now, again, we learned in the previous Mishnah that a 6x6 patch that's surrounded by a tefach high border, you can plant 13 or 18 species, 12 on the border and 1 or 6 in the actual patch, depending on the machloket we had yesterday. The Mishnah now is going to expand on this rule. Givul shayak gavot tefach v'nitamet. Let's say a border was originally 1 tefach high, but later it was reduced to less than a tefach, kasher. That is still valid. Shayak kasher mitchilato, because it was valid at the start. And the Mefarshim explain all the species that were planted in it when it was a tefach high is allowed to be left in its place. That's what it means, kasher. However, you cannot plant new species unless you rebuild the height. So when the Mishnah says kasher, it's talking about whatever you already had planted. Not that you can plant new things, that you cannot do until you rebuild the height. Now the Mishnah is going to give another case where different species can be planted in small areas. If a furrow or a water channel, which the Rash explains, that the water channel dried up and it's suitable for planting. Obviously you can't plant in a flowing water channel. So again, a furrow or a water channel, shehem amukim tefach, that they're 1 tefach deep, zo'in letochan shlosha zeronin, we can plant in them 3 different kinds of seeds. We are allowed to plant in them 3 different kinds of seeds, and the Mefarshim point out the ones that are called yirakot. Echad mikan ve'echad mikan, one on top of one side of the furrow or the channel, and one on top of the other side of the furrow or channel. Ve'echad be'emtze, and one inside the middle, which means at the bottom of the furrow or the channel, provided that you have a space of 1.5 tvachim that's left in between them. This the Rav adds, and the Mefarshim, that's the usual amount of space that you need between individual vegetables. Now, the chidush of the Mishnah is that even though the one planted at the bottom of the furrow or channel looks like it's completely trapped, meaning surrounded with the other 2 species, the one that's on one side and the one on the other side, nevertheless, it's mutar. Why? Because it is separated from them by the proper distance, and the Mefarshim explain that there's no special leniency because of the furrow or channel being a tefach deep. The chidush is that even though one of them is being planted a tefach deeper than the others and looks like it's trapped between the other 2, that still is mutar. That is in Rabotai Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now is going to continue discussing planting different kinds of vegetables near each other. If a rosh tor, which we learned means the corner of a field, so if the corner of a field containing one kind of vegetable extended into a field containing another kind of vegetable, meaning that it touched the side of the other field, mutar, that's permitted, because the corner looks like the end of his first field, and it does not look like one kind of vegetable growing in a field of another kind of vegetable. Now, this is basically the same rule that Mefarshim point out as the Mishnah we learned in Perek Bet Mishnah Zayin when we spoke about the fields of grain. Our Mishnah is teaching that this leniency of corner applies to fields of different kinds of vegetables as well. Now, even though the leaves of the vegetable plants grow and spread out in a way that blurs the distinction between the two fields, the corner nevertheless is permitted when it's a corner extending. Now, we learned in Perek Bet Mishna Yud that if somebody plants a row of one kind of vegetables inside a field of another kind of vegetables, he has to leave 6 tefach space between the two species. The Mishnah is going to add another condition to that halakha. If his field was planted with one kind of vegetable, and he wants to plant in this field a row of another kind of vegetable by leaving the proper separation between the row and the rest of the field, meaning the 6 tefachim on all the sides between the row and the rest of the field, like we learned in Perek Bet Mishnah Yud. Rabbi Yishmael says, he can only do it if the furrow, meaning the row that you plant, extends completely through the field from one side, from one end to the other, from one end to the other of the field. Now, in this way, the Mefarshim point out, the new row splits the rest of the field into 2 separate fields and makes it look like it's an area of its own. And since it's separated by the proper 6 tvachim from each of the other 2 fields, it is not kilayim. However, if you don't follow what the Rabbi Yishmael says, if the new row does not completely extend through the field, but it ends in the middle of it, it looks like an insignificant part of a large field instead of its own area. That makes it look like a mixture of a small amount of one crop and a large amount of another, which is kilayim. That's how the Tosfot Yom Tov explains the Rav Mibar Tenura. Rabbi Akiva says, Orech 6 tefachim, it is enough if the furrow has a length of 6 tefachim, verochav melo'o, and the width of a full furrow, which is 6 tefachim. However, it doesn't have to extend through the entire field, meaning a typical furrow, a typical row is 6 tefachim wide, including the soil that piles up on either side of this trench made by the plow. Since the new row has to be at least as wide as the furrow separating it from the main crop, it has to be also 6 tefachim minimum. Rabbi Yishmael accepts that part of Rabbi Akiva's ruling that it has to be 6 tefachim, but Rabbi Akiva says that the new furrow doesn't have to extend the full length of the field. As long as it's at least 6 tefachim long and starts from one end of the field, it is mutar with the proper separations, even though it's surrounded on 3 sides by other species. However, if it doesn't start from the edge of the field, but it's surrounded on all 4 sides by the other species, even Rabbi Akiva would prohibit it, calling it kilayim. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rochav kimlo rochav aparsa, the fur only has to be as wide as the full width of the sole of a foot, which is a tefach. He's the most lenient. He says this is the amount of space you need. Well, really, this is the amount of space that's needed to walk around a vegetable garden and water it. But in order to plant the row of one kind of vegetable inside a field of a different kind of vegetable, everyone says that it has to be separated by the other kind, by at least 6 tefachim. That's based off the Mishnah in Perek Bet Mishnah Yud. It also has to reach the edge of the field at one end, that's Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda, or at both ends, which is Rabbi Yishmael. The planted row also has to have a minimum width of 6 tefachim, that's Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, or 1 tefach, which is Rabbi Yehuda. Individual plants of different species have to be separated by 1.5 tefachim. That we learned in the beginning of this parak. Now, 5 different species are allowed to be planted in small amounts near one another if the arugad, the vegetable patch, is 6 by 6 tefachim, as long as they make corners into each other, like we learned in the beginning of this parak. If the patch has a raised border around it, even more can be planted there. And Rabotai, this explanation I read to you, this summary, I read to you from the Art Scroll Elucidated. They are following the Rab, how it's interpreted by the classic Mishnah commentaries. There are many different explanations by various commentaries how to explain this Mishnah. Again, I suggest you look at the diagrams for this Mishnah to show how it extends to the end of the field, or it can be done in the middle of the 2 species. It'll clear it up very well. But like I said, we tried to explain it simply following the Art Scroll Elucidated. Everyone have a good night. Baruch Adonai La'olam. Amen v'amen.